Okay, good morning to everyone. Committee on Science, Space, and Technology will come to order. Welcome to today's hearing entitled The Future of NASA, Perspectives on Strategic Vision for America's Space Program is our topic for today. And in front of your packets containing the written testimony, biographies, and truth and testimony disclosures for today's witnesses. And before I get into my opening statement, I want to say a few words about some folks on this committee. I don't believe hardly any of them are here, but or maybe we ought to wait till they show. But I want to talk about Roscoe Bartlett and Judy Biggert, Todd Aiken, Sandy Adams, Ben Cole, Quayle, and Chip Kravach. The Democratic side's Jerry Costello, about as fine a class of guys you'll ever know, is not coming back to us, and Hanson Clark of Michigan. Of course, Lynn Woosley is usually here to fuss at me, but I proposed to her 3 times, and she turned me down 4. But they'll be here in a little bit. In the meantime, let me recognize the next chairman of this committee, a long-term friend of mine, a person I absolutely couldn't do without, wouldn't want to be in Congress if he were not in Congress with me. My friend from San Antonio, who will be chairing this committee for probably the next 10 years. And I'm going to be right with him. And we hope we can do some things to EPA. We hope we can work on a health bill. We hope we can do a lot of things together. And Mr. Chairman, honored to have you. Thank you. I guess I can go on and just read for the record. What do you think I ought to do, Eddie? Wait till they get here. I'll go on with my opening statement.
We're an organization, so they probably will not be coming.
Yeah. Okay.
The caucus organization committee.
Okay. So let's go. Right. How long is this thing?
It's on the page before we handed it to
It's the first opening speech I've ever had. It's 1,020 pages. It's 25, 26. God almighty. Holy smoke, Ed. Can you put up that? This one? I'll get on with it since I read well from a printed page. It's not going to take me very long. They're beginning to show. So I recognize myself for 5 minutes or so for an opening statement. And I say once again, good morning and welcome to today's hearing. I want to especially recognize some of our colleagues and our colleague and friend, Robert Walker, the former chairman of this committee for many years, and for agreeing to testify here today. Bob, it's good to see you, and I thank you and the other witnesses for being with us. And I recognize it takes a lot of time and effort goes into the preparation of hearing testimony, and I want all of you to know that your expert knowledge and your vast experience is very useful to the committee. Without you, we could not have a bill nor have a recommendation for the future. And as we consider legislation, we also thank you for taking the time to appear here today. There are a number of significant issues confronting NASA and its space program, a diminishing number of missions under development in the space science area, an aeronautics budget that can no longer support full-scale demonstration flights, and no clearly articulated vision for our human exploration program beyond the International Space Station. And that International Space Station, to me, is the number one. We've got to get there first and have some security there before we can even think about the other. We can think about it and maybe have some plans for it. But with regard to human space flight, during the national debate following the Columbia accident nearly 10 years ago, we emerged with guiding principles and goals that were overwhelmingly endorsed by both Republicans and Democrats in the House and Senate, resulting in the NASA Authorization Acts of 2005 and 2008. And even though the funding was often less than many of us recommended, there was a consensus on the overall strategic direction. That consensus was short-lived when the administration, with no notice, abruptly canceled Constellation via submission of the FY 2011 budget. The current agreement, if it can be called that, is not a consensus as much as it is a compromise. No one got everything they wanted, but the lack of a clear consensus, grounded in an agreement to national priorities, resulted in no effective way to prioritize the many competing demands. It's been clear over the last few budget cycles that there are fundamental disagreements. Constellation was an integrated development plan to first replace the space shuttle's access to the space station in low Earth orbit, and then evolve over there into the heavy lift rockets, allowing NASA to take longer strides and once again reach beyond low Earth to the moon and then on beyond. As Congress' insistence and the present compromise includes a heavy lift rocket development program, but in the general lack of consensus on goals and destination has sown the seeds for disappointment as three large development programs: the Space Launch System, the Orion Crew Capsule, and the Commercial Crew Program compete for the same diminishing resources in NASA's exploration systems budget. Since the Commercial Crew Program supports the ISS, perhaps it should more appropriately be funded by the space operations budget. The administration, Congress, and NASA should all look for ways to eliminate waste and duplication. We're in a very challenging budget environment, and that'll be with us for some time, for the next several years. Fiscal realities demand that NASA become more efficient and sized correctly to accomplish its goals. But consensus will have to be established among the agency's stakeholders to comply, and also to clarify NASA's strategic vision, their goals, and their missions. The good work that NASA has done and that NASA can do in the future is so very important to me and to us, to everyone here in this room. I want to preserve our International Space Station, and it is a strategic goal to go beyond it. But it's not likely that with this Congress and this electorate that we can expect vast sums for the moon, Mars, or an asteroid. We can't go to Mars until our people can go to the grocery store. In other words, it's about the economy. The economy has to improve before NASA funding increases. I want us to work together to ensure that the American people get the kind of results that NASA is capable of producing and has demonstrated so often. We have a very distinguished panel of witnesses today, and I look forward to this hearing, and should really spark much needed national dialogue about NASA's future. The group is uniquely qualified to start this very important discussion by sharing their own perspective about the strategic direction of America's space program. And that concludes my remarks. I now recognize Mrs. Johnson for her opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to all. I want to particularly welcome our witnesses and a former chair that I previously served with, and I look forward to all of the testimony. At this time, the Democratic Caucus is having a organizational meeting that supposed to have started at 9, but because of the lateness of the ranking member meeting, it started a little bit late, so our members that are returning and concerned about what committees they're going to be on for the next time will probably not be here today. Today's hearing is an important one for the committee because NASA is a critical part of the nation's research and development enterprise, as well as being a source of inspiration for our young people and the worldwide symbol of American technological powers, leadership, and goodwill. We want NASA to succeed in its endeavors because its success benefits our nation in many, many ways. In establishing NASA through the Space Act of 1958, Congress directed the agency to contribute materially to the preservation of the role of the United States as a leader in the aeronautical and space science and technology, and in the application thereof to the conduct of peaceful activities within and outside the atmosphere. Successive NASA authorization acts over the years have stressed the need for a balanced program of science, aeronautics, technological research, and human space flight and exploration. The result has been that this balanced program has given advances that have enhanced knowledge, promoted innovation and economic vitality, inspired our youth, and deepened our understanding of the Earth and environment. However, in recent years, NASA's ability to carry out its mission has been eroded. In that regard, it's estimated that NASA's purchasing power has actually decreased by about 18% in the constant dollars from fiscal year 1992 to fiscal year 2012, in spite of the agency being given a number of major initiatives to carry out over that same period. In fact, last year's appropriated budget was about $1 billion less than fiscal year 2010. The cumulative impact of this budgetary instability has been felt by all of NASA's programs and its institutional infrastructure, a problem also highlighted by NASA's Inspector General in a recent report. And we will hear similar concerns raised by the National Research Council witness today as he discusses his panel's recently released report. Ironically, the issues considered by NRC panel are not new to this committee. We've heard them raised in one form or another in both this and previous Congresses. I hope that the findings of the NRC's panel assessment will encourage both the administration and the Congress to put NASA on a firmer footing and to recognize NASA for the national asset it is. While NASA's programs are funded as part of the federal domestic discretionary budget, we should not forget that those programs are long-term R&D undertakings, and they can't just be turned on and off whenever we have a short-term fiscal issue needing attention, not if we want them to be successful, and not if we want to maintain our commitment to the dedicated workforce that is trying to bring them to fruition. That is a challenge, and we are going to face in the coming months and years as we work to put the nation's financial house in order, because we forget at our peril the hard reality that investments in R&D and innovation, such as in programs and projects carried out by NASA, are just that, investments. Investments in our nation's future and in the future of our children. It may only be in retrospect that we will learn the true cost of walking away from investments in R&D agencies such as NASA. But I firmly believe that those costs will be high and long-lasting if we go down such a destructive path. I hope we don't do so, because other nations increasingly recognize the benefits that a strong and active space program can deliver, and as a result, we see them being willing to make the necessary investments to build their capabilities, even in their days of obscurity. Mr. Chairman, our leadership and preeminence in space and aeronautics are at stake. Our children's future jobs and long-term global competitiveness are at stake. Resting on our laurels from prior accomplishments is not an option, whether in science, aeronautics, or human exploration. That That is not to say that we shouldn't do all we can to encourage efficiencies in NASA's programs and infrastructure and eliminate waste wherever we find it. But all of those efficiencies will be naught if we do not also recognize that sustained investments in research, technology, and development must also be made if NASA is to succeed. Mr. Chairman, before I conclude my remarks, allowed me to take a moment to thank Mr. Costello and Ms. Woosley, Mr. Miller, and Mr. Clark for their service to our nation. Each of them will be departing the House of Representatives at the completion of the 112th Congress, and I want to wish them well. They have been thoughtful, hard-working members of our committee caucus, and I shall miss them. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Our gentlelady yields back. And if there are other members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point. We have some of our departing members here, and I think it's time to say a few words about it before I start my opening statement and before we introduce the witnesses properly. I'd like to say a few words about several members of our committee and thank them for their dedication to Congress and to the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. On the Republican side, Roscoe Bartlett, I don't know if Roscoe's here or not, but Roscoe, I've always enjoyed telling him he's too old to be here, but he always, his questions give me more information than the answers he listed, but he's a great member, and I'm both surprised and disappointed that he was defeated, and proud and pray for whoever's going to take his place that they can yield the service that old fellow yielded. And then, of course, Judy Biggert of Illinois had her national lab at Oregon, outstanding member. We were conferees on the National Defense Act. I found Judy on the right side of everything, and really, really going to miss her. Todd Aiken of Missouri had a strong showing for the Senate. Had some rocks and handicaps along the way, but he's a good man. He's served well for us. And people kept writing to me, telling me to put him off this committee, and I said time and time again, if I could put anybody off the committee, I'd put Sensenbrenner off or Eddie Bernice or somebody, but we don't have the right to put anybody off, and we couldn't do it without Sensenbrenner. So he's still here. Yep. And doing a good job. Sandy Adams of Florida is still young enough to continue her fight for NASA and for the Kennedy Space Center. She did a good job of that. Ben Quayle, young man, he's not here either today, but I knew his father so well. I spent 7 or 8 days in Russia with his dad, and I was with him when he made a speech to the retiring editors and the retiring school people there, all of them communists. And he was making his speech, and he made the mistake of opening it up for questions. And the way the Russians ask questions, they make about a 15-minute speech and then get into their question. But after their speech, they said, if you love us so much, why do you still have all those guns pointed toward us? And Dan and I were way back down away from them. There's a rail between us, and they couldn't hear what I said to him. I said, tell the SOB you don't trust him. And Dan said if I ever did him like that again, he'd get up and walk out of there because he couldn't. He said if he'd laughed, they'd run both of us out of there. But he made a good speech back to them and told them that they had a place at the table, and he believed that one day they would be there. And his son is a very fine young man, did a wonderful job as vice chairman of his committee, and we'll miss that young man. How do you lose a guy like Chip Kravach, a Navy fighter pilot? I don't hold that against him. Flew many years as an airline pilot, very knowledgeable. Fought for everything that was right. he served with me on I believe we served together on the Transportation Committee. Jerry Costello, there's no more class guy anywhere than Jerry. He's going back to Illinois, and we're going to really miss him. Miss his work here and miss his friendship. Lynn Woosley, is Lynn here yet? She's not here. Brad Miller of North Carolina. Brad and I have gone at it several times. I've learned something from him, several things. He's a class guy. He goes back to one of the better law practices in North Carolina. All my folks coming from where Cannon Mills, Kannapolis, not very far, Brad, from where you live, and we'll exercise your work. But you're young enough to come back, and I wish you well, and we'll miss you on this program. You've been a great member. And Hanson Clark. Hanson we did a launch together, and he was a great guy. It's an honor to serve on this committee with all of you. Your dedication, experience, and wisdom is going to be deeply missed by this Congress and the next Congress, but no matter what they go to next, they'll always be friends and colleagues, and I look forward to seeing them back. Maybe we'll ask them to testify like we've asked Bob Walker here to testify today. And Ms. Johnson, again, I thank you. Thank you for yielding back. At this time, I'd like to introduce our panel of witnesses. Honorable Robert S. Walker needs a little introduction in this room. As a former chairman of this committee, Bob led this committee from 1995 to 1997, and since retiring from Congress after 20 years of elected office, he's now the executive chairman of Wexler and Walker Public Policy Associates. Welcome, Bob. Our next witness is retired Major General Ronald Sega. General Sega is here today in his capacity as a co-chair of the National Research Council Committee on NASA's Strategic Direction. General Sega currently serves as Vice President and Enterprise Executive for Energy and the Environment for Colorado State University and Ohio State University. He led a very distinguished career in the U.S. Air Force and at NASA, most recently as Undersecretary of the Air Force, DOD Executive for Space, and prior to that as Director of Defense Research and Technology. As an astronaut, General Sega flew 2 space shuttles, STS-60 in 1994 and STS-76 in 1996. And General, we certainly welcome you. We next welcome the Honorable Marion Blakey, who's the President and CEO of Aerospace Industries Association, representing more than 150 leading aerospace manufacturers. Prior to AIA, Mrs. Blakey served a 5-year term as administrator of the FAA, and before that as chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board. Mrs. Blakey, we do really welcome you. And our next witness is Dr. Thomas Zurbuchen. Zurbuchen, did I do that right? Associate Professor for Space Science and Aerospace Engineering at the University of Michigan. He's a specialist in robotic exploration in space and team leader for the development of the fast imaging plasma spectrometer on the Messenger spacecraft in orbit around the planet Mercury. And we certainly welcome you. And our next witness, Dr. Scott Page, is the director of the Space Policy Institute and a professor in the practice of international affairs at George Washington University's Elliott School of International Affairs. From 2005 to 2008, he served as an associate administrator for program analysis and evaluation at NASA. Prior to that, he was assistant director for space and aeronautics in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. Dr. Page, we welcome you as well. And as our witnesses should know, testimony is limited to 5 minutes, after which the members of the committee will have 5 minutes each to ask questions. And you're not just held to 5 minutes. Your time's valuable. It took you time to prepare to come here. It took you years to get prepared to be asked to come here, and you're here. And your time's very, very important. We won't hold you to the 5 minute time. Just do your best. Our committee protocol dictates that we recognize a former science Chairman Bob Walker as our first witness, but we've talked and discussed, and I know from reading the testimony that he refers to many of the details in the NRC report. With his indulgence and with our discussion and his suggestion, I think it'd be useful to hear General Sega describe the NRC's findings and then turn to Chairman Walker and the other witnesses for their testimony. Do I hear objection? The chair hears none. General Sega of the committee now recognizes you for 5 minutes to present your testimony.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Johnson, members of the committee, colleagues, I am Ron Sega, Vice Chair of the National Research Council's Committee on NASA's Strategic Direction. On behalf of Al Carnicel, Chair of the committee, and our 12 members, it is my pleasure to come before you today to speak to you about the work of our committee. Our committee was charged with considering the strategic direction of the agency as set forth most recently in the 2011 NASA Strategic Plan and other relevant statements of space policy issued by the President of the United States. We were also charged with considering the goals of the agency as set forth in the 1958 National Aeronautics and Space Act, as well as recent legislation, and with assessing the relevance of NASA's goals to national priorities. Finally, we were charged with recommending how NASA could establish and effectively communicate a common, unifying vision for NASA's strategic direction that encompasses NASA's varied missions. Our committee was not charged with establishing strategic goals for NASA, and we did not do so. Our committee consists of members from industry and academia, former NASA aerospace officials, and former analysts and experts from both the executive and legislative branches. We met 5 times throughout 2012. The committee received input from nearly 800 members of the public through a web-based questionnaire. And small groups of committee members visited each of the 9 NASA field centers and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. The resulting report, entitled NASA's Strategic Direction and the Need for National Consensus, is a consensus report by the committee. As I am sure you're aware, NASA has been tugged in multiple directions for the past several years. Despite a turbulent policy environment, the agency has made many astonishing accomplishments. There remains, however, a lack of consensus on the agency's future direction among the United States political leadership. Without such a consensus, the agency cannot be expected to develop or work effectively toward long-term priorities. In addition, there is a mismatch between the portfolio of programs assigned to the agency and the budget allocated by Congress. What we found during the course of our deliberations was rather obvious. Although NASA develops a strategic plan on a regular basis, the agency itself does not establish its strategic goals. Those are developed by the national leadership, and key stakeholders within the national leadership do not always agree on the goals the agency should pursue. Thus, our committee recommends that the administration should take the lead in forging a new national consensus on NASA's future that is stated in terms of a set of clearly defined strategic goals and objectives. This process should apply both within the administration and between the administration and Congress, and should be reached only after meaningful technical consultations with the private sector and potential international partners. The strategic goals and objectives should be ambitious, yet technically rational, and should focus on the long term. Following the establishment of a new consensus on the agency's future, NASA should establish a new strategic plan that provides a framework for decisions on how the agency will pursue its strategic goals and objectives, allows for flexible and realistic implementation, clearly establishes agency-wide priorities to guide the allocation of resources within the agency budget, and presents a comprehensive picture that integrates the various fields of aeronautics and space activities. To reduce the mismatch between the agency's activities and the resources allocated to it, the White House, Congress, and NASA, as appropriate, could employ any or all of the following four non-mutually exclusive options. The committee does not recommend any one option or combination of options, but presents these to illustrate the scope of decisions and trades that could be made. Option 1, institute an aggressive restructuring program to reduce infrastructure and personnel costs to improve efficiency. Option 2, engage in and commit for the long term to more cost-sharing partnerships with other government agencies, private sector industries, and international partners. Option 3, increase the size of the NASA budget. Option 4, reduce considerably the size and scope of elements of NASA's current program portfolio to better fit the current and anticipated budget profile. This would require reducing or eliminating one or more of NASA's current portfolio elements: human exploration, Earth and space science, aeronautics, and space technology, in favor of the remaining elements. Each of these sample options, with the possible exception of option 2, would require legislative action. Our recommendation with respect to NASA centers states, first, the administration and Congress should adopt regulatory and legislative reforms that would enable NASA to improve the flexibility of the management of its centers. Second, NASA should transform its network of field centers into an integrated system that supports its strategic plan and communication strategy and advances its strategic goals and objectives. With regard to partnerships, the committee recommends NASA should work with other government agencies and with responsibilities in aeronautics and space to more effectively and efficiently coordinate the nation's aeronautics and space activities. And the United States should explore opportunities to lead a more international approach to future large space efforts, both in the human space program and in the science program. Finally, the committee was impressed with the quality of personnel and level of commitment of NASA's civil service and contractor staffs, and with the superb work done by the agency in general. However, the committee also heard about the frustration of many staff with the agency's current path and the limitations imposed on it by the inability of the national leadership to agree upon a long-term direction for the agency. Only with a national consensus on the agency's future direction, along the lines described in this report, can NASA continue to deliver the wonder, the knowledge, the national security and economic benefits, and the technology that typified its history. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I would be pleased to respond to any questions the committee might have.
And thank you, General, and we will have questions. Gives me pleasure now to recognize the Honorable Robert Walker, the distinguished former chairman of the committee. I've listened to Bob as a Democrat, I've listened to him as a Republican, and I've respected him always as both. We recognize you for 5 minutes, or as long as you might take, Bob.
Thank you very much, Chairman Hall and Ranking Member Johnson, distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the warm welcome back to this committee room. Chairman Hall, I want to first congratulate you for the leadership that you've given to this committee. You've led the committee with grace and good humor, and you have really given Chairman Smith a strong base on which to build the science, technology, and space leadership for the future. And I thank you for all that you've contributed here and to the nation during your career. If you believe as I do that humankind's destiny lies in the stars, and if you believe as I do that NASA should be an instrument in the fulfillment of that destiny, then the work of preparing NASA for the daunting challenges of strategy, budget, and relevance in the 21st century is truly the work of shaping the future. The recently released report by the National Research Council does a comprehensive job of detailing the challenges that today's NASA faces. Lack of agreed upon direction, lack of adequate resources to do all that is asked of the agency, aging infrastructure, the emergence of other space-capable nations, the collapse of some international partnerships, the rapid pace of new technology development, and the increasing irrelevance of the aeronautical research program. Much of this landscape cannot be laid wholly at NASA's doorstep, but its culture based upon successes of 50 years ago contributes to these problems. NRC provided 4 options for addressing an uncertain future. I choose option 2, and to quote again what Ron just told you, engage in and commit for the long term to more cost-sharing partnerships with other U.S. government agencies, private sector industries, and international partners, end of quote. Within that option, I will emphasize the public-private partnerships because I believe them to be the best way to obtain the resources so vitally needed to make NASA's missions achievable. I say that mindful of the fact that one of the most important cost-saving measures that could be implemented in our space program would be to use the totality of U.S. assets for U.S. purposes. It makes no sense for NASA to spend billions on development of technology which is already available or under development by other sectors of the government or private industry. Some available technology may have to be modified to meet specific NASA objectives, but the bulk of the costs can be shared. NASA's basic role must be to do projects that push the envelope of what we know. High risk will lead to new technologies. That combination of risk and reward will underpin the next generation of space knowledge and products. Space and technology leadership requires a much broader view of the space community than has been traditional. If NASA is to have the resources it needs to maintain a preeminent world role, it must expand its funding base by reaching beyond a narrow aerospace focus and beyond the authorization and appropriation process on Capitol Hill. I say that latter point with all due respect, but the reality is that no federal budget in the foreseeable future is going to provide NASA with the money it needs to do everything we want it to do. NASA must see entrepreneurship and enablement as key components of its science, technology, and exploration programs. NASA can extend its reach and find new financial resources by opening its doors wide to collaborative programs that allow any and all American space entrepreneurs willing to pay for it access to NASA expertise. There are some positive signs that NASA sees merit in this approach. The commercial cargo and crew programs are encouraging. The use of NASA infrastructure by private sector participants is welcome. But Congress needs to expand the authority to move even more aggressively in this new direction. Too often, the steps taken thus far have been grudging because they really do represent a significant cultural shift. But that shift has been endorsed by several recent commissions that looked at NASA's future and became concerned. The commission I chaired in 2002, one chaired by Pete Aldridge in 2004, and one that Norm Augustine chaired in 2009, all reached the conclusion that commercial activity in the form of public-private partnerships is a key to space leadership. The Aldridge Commission in particular called for broadening the space-related community and restructuring NASA to interact with that community. In turn, it was believed that NASA could benefit directly from the expanded community as it attracted outside investment in its activities and used its people and facilities to enable progress on many space fronts. A larger network of people and industries with a direct tie to NASA has to be a part of its strategic plan. It begins with buying available services from non-traditional sources. It evolves to a NASA prepared to see multiple non-traditional opportunities for new funding for its programs and activities. We already know there's interest. New companies have been created to provide services to NASA and to pursue business beyond NASA. Those companies should not be seen as rivals or detriments to NASA. They are instead the outgrowth of past NASA successes, prepared to learn from what NASA has achieved and poised to grow the U.S. presence in the world space enterprise. Moreover, thinking in non-traditional entrepreneurial ways potentially can access tens of millions, perhaps hundreds of millions of dollars of private investment in NASA activities. If NASA programs and centers were restructured to take advantage of a flow of private capital, there is no end to potential collaborations. For example, sports teams in the country reap hundreds of millions of dollars in sponsorships without impact on their basic mission. Would anything in science, aeronautics, or exploration missions be harmed if the names were attached to particular projects and they were sponsored? I can't imagine why. These sponsorship dollars could be structured to remain outside the appropriations process, increasing the amounts of money available to NASA and at the same time avoiding to some extent the vagaries of the annual appropriation cycle. And what kind of money is conceivably available? To pick a high-tech example, Formula One racing, the sponsorships there pay for operations costing $200 to $300 million a year. That's enough for a whole space flight. NASA as an entrepreneur and NASA as a space enabler for growing space enterprise is how we address the resource problems and assure NASA a future that is wholly relevant to our nation's economy. Congress will have to be willing to make some adjustments necessary to access that kind of future. But when the GoDaddy rover is traversing Martian terrain, we will be more solidly on our way to fulfilling our destiny in the stars. Moreover, we will have assured that destiny by leveraging our greatest economic asset, the inventiveness of a free market. Thank you very much.
And that's just the way it is. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Walker. And now I thank you too, General, and now recognize Honorable Marion Blakey to give your testimony for 5 minutes or more or less.
Thank you, Chairman Hall, Ranking Member Johnson, and members of this committee. Thank you for the opportunity to be here again. I'm Marion Blakey, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Aerospace Industries Association, the nation's premier trade association for aerospace and defense manufacturers. AIA believes that NASA continues to be a leading-edge investment in our nation's future. National missions and programs save lives, they grow the economy, and they inspire the world. I must tell you, AIA has a new report called Space in Our World, and I'll make certain all members of the committee have a copy, because we are very proud of the fact that we're documenting space systems and how they're woven into the everyday lives of Americans. NASA programs are hallmarks of the character of our nation and our leadership. And as Americans, we're always looking forward to the next great frontier. We need to think carefully, therefore, about changing from current programs. It not only takes a consensus to do so, it takes resources and capabilities, some that we're already building today. Remember that had we not committed to the F-1 rocket engine program in the 1950s, well before President Kennedy's Apollo announcement, we would never have gotten to the moon by 1969. This engine enabled a wide variety of human spaceflight missions, and SLS and Orion will certainly help us take the next steps in space that I think all of us here at this table want. So, how do we keep NASA moving in the right direction? Clearly, NASA needs stable, long-term investment and steady policy goals, and more funding would be better. But we're concerned that constant churn in NASA's programs will lead to less progress. Stability is essential to both space mission success and the health of the United States space industrial base. Any examination of NASA's strategic direction must consider the impact to this base, which is also essential to national security space capabilities as well. So let me take this opportunity, Mr. Chairman, to recognize you as the longest-serving member of the House Science Committee. By giving NASA solid guidance with the 2010 Authorization Act, you've demonstrated the leadership essential to assure future industry investments and recruit new aerospace talent. AIA agrees with NASA's 3 priority goals, which enable critical space capabilities. First, we must fully utilize the International Space Station, which is a unique national lab. Here, the Commercial Crew and Cargo Program provides the quickest way for our nation to access the ISS. I thought it was terrific to see the success of the first commercial cargo resupply mission just this fall. NASA's commercial initiatives promise to bring down costs, and they will free resources for other programs. Second, NASA's capabilities-based architecture is a realistic approach that's within the fiscal limits that we can then build space systems needed to explore new destinations. To date, significant progress has been made on this program, including the delivery of the first Orion capsule to Florida for launch. NASA is also engaging the ISS international partners in innovative ways that expand our ability to completely support exploration together. Third, we must maintain global leadership in space science. Let's get the Webb telescope into orbit and operating, follow up on our Mars exploration success, and replenish our indispensable Earth observation system capabilities. But I must tell you, the spectrum of sequestration concerns me greatly. Not only would it lead to program delays that would prove more costly in the long term, but it would also have the immediate impact of putting more than 20,000 NASA contractor jobs at risk. That's the conclusion, and this is very new, of George Mason University economist Stephen Fuller in an AIA commissioned study that we're releasing today. And again, I'll make certain that all members of this committee have this brand new study, because the report highlights the impact of NASA procurement spending reductions in 11 key states. For example, Mr. Chairman, Texas would lose nearly 6,000 NASA-related, highly skilled jobs as a result of sequestration. That's a $320 million impact to the state of Texas. In conclusion, by focusing investments in support of the 2010 Act, the Congress can ensure the health of our space industrial base and assure our space program will remain second to none. I thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the U.S. space industry. Look forward to your questions. Thank you.
And I thank you for good testimony and for your accolades. I'm not the longest serving, I'm just the oldest. And if John Dingell will cooperate with me, I'll be the oldest one of these days here. And I'd yield you another hour for your kind words if you like. Good testimony, and we thank you. Now we have Dr. Zurbuchen for your 5 minutes. Doctor, recognize you, sir.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thanks for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Thomas Zurbuchen, a Swiss name from the mountains in Switzerland, and I'm a professor of space science and aerospace engineering at the University of Michigan. I run a research group with 6 space instruments in space right now, and we're operating those and developing breakthrough science and that is published in premier journals around the world. I'm also the Associate Dean for Entrepreneurial Programs and concerned about spreading of innovation and entrepreneurship in our educational mission at this university and universities around the country. This is a period of limited resources, and we need to focus to position ourselves for better times. The way to do this is to ensure that a talented workforce will be available and disruptive innovations and technology breakthroughs are pursued. We need to do this through low-cost and modest-sized missions. The talented workforce and the innovations will be developed primarily by universities and industry, particularly small businesses, and not primarily NASA centers. Hence, we need to pursue a strategy in which universities and industry, as well as NASA centers, are fully engaged. Today, I want to focus on 2 key aspects of this strategy: the focus on people and the focus on disruption, innovative disruption. And I want to briefly talk about the balance, the program balance that is responsive to both of them. The #1 priority of the space program, and especially its science program, should be talented people. Every mission in space, great or small, is carried out by people, not paperwork. We need people and their know-how. We have to ensure that NASA's space missions have access to the very best talent. How do we do that? First, we must recognize that top talent does not just hang around and wait for better times. Builders want to build, innovators will innovate, and NASA leadership must be focused not just on the glory of days past, but the aspirations and dreams of the innovators of the future. Second, some of this talent will be at NASA centers, but most of the talent will be in academia and industry, particularly in small companies. Therefore, encouraging competition in emerging space industries will keep top talent focused and on efforts that ultimately will aid this nation in achieving its most ambitious goals through both technical innovation and reduced cost. The next priority, in addition to people, is innovative disruption. Disruption is good. Disruptive programs overturn old paradigms, create new markets, and engender new value systems. These programs focus on smaller spacecraft, rapid turnaround missions, and I'm convinced that science programs with these kinds of priorities will look different than the ones that we're building today. Consider, for example, the RAX program at the University of Michigan, which built and launched 2 CubeSats within 2 years for less than $1 million. These NSF-funded tiny satellites make new measurements probing the origins of space weather, especially in high latitudes, the auroral regions. And the first one failed a few weeks into orbit. It's tough to do this. And the second one has now made measurements for over a year, research that is published in our premier journals. Also, this mission has provided hands-on experience for 50 of our best students. Many of these leaders work at SpaceX and some of the new space companies, in fact, being leaders of certain domain expertise there already, really shortly after graduating, and some of them work at NASA JPL and other NASA centers. They got experiences most students in the U.S. did not. RAX is all about innovative disruption, training of the world's best talent, and for our space program. So how do we build a program that is responsive to these kind of constraints? And I do believe that a program like this requires small and responsive missions and projects from suborbital to large strategic missions. It's a big priority, particularly to invest in modest size and principal investigator-led missions, such as discovery or new frontiers or venture class missions, depending on the respective community. These missions have provided the best value for the money invested. That's the type of program where the research resulting in NASA's first Nobel Prize was conducted, and it's the type of program that built the spacecraft currently orbiting planet Mercury, and one of my sensors is on there. Consider, for example, the University of Michigan Cygnus mission that was recently selected, that's focused to eliminate one of the biggest uncertainties in predictions of big storms, such as hurricanes and some of the storms that bring tremendous amounts of rain here sometimes. The uncertainty that relates to the strength of these storms. The science payload is approximately 100 times smaller in mass, in price, and in power than conventional satellite wind measuring instruments, which enables an entire constellation of these sensors to be flown at lower cost. So the use of this constellation reduces the revisit time and therefore the time resolution of the most pivotal measurements of these winds from days to hours, which is needed to observe the inner core processes of these storms. So these short-term priorities, however, must be balanced and aligned with big bets and big thinking worthy of NASA. NASA science should stretch our imagination, stimulate our thinking, and demonstrate leadership worldwide. We must remember that the work that we do is not purely scientific, technological or economic or military-based. The prime discoveries that further our understanding of the cosmos have fueled and inspired the human imagination across all cultures and all times, and I believe will do so in the future. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Dr. Zurbuchen. Good advice and well presented, and thank you, sir. This time, recognize Dr. Pace for your 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for this opportunity to discuss the important topic of NASA's strategic direction. It's been noted that the NASA strategic plan does not drive NASA budget requests or the allocation of relative emphasis to activities within those requests, exploration, science, aeronautics. As such, it's not surprising that there are numerous disconnects between the stated policies, approved programs, and their actual funding. The technical and budgetary risks facing the agency are the most visible symptoms of deeper policy and management disconnects between the White House and Congress. Such disconnects are not inevitable and can be resolved by the White House and Congress, as well as NASA, working together. And as often stated, budgets are policy, and NASA budgets are really a more accurate reflection of de facto national policy than the NASA strategic plan is. The NASA budget is a political choice. It's a reflection of what we value as a society. The Obama administration's stimulus program was greater than NASA's budget cumulatively from 1958 to 2008 in constant dollar terms. The United States sent humans to the moon, built and operated a space shuttle fleet for 30 years, explored the solar system, and contributed its share of the International Space Station for less than the cost of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. The point of such a comparison is not that space is inexpensive, but rather that in today's environment, sustaining discretionary expenditure for civil space exploration will be challenging unless there is a clearer rationale linking such efforts to broader national interests that can be supported in a bipartisan manner over many years. What I hope to convey in my written testimony was that while NASA faces serious challenges, particularly in human space exploration, a way forward does exist to put the agency on a more stable and sustainable foundation that will advance U.S. national interests. The seemingly separate threads of human, robotic, civil, commercial, and national security space activities are in fact deeply intertwined with each other, both politically and technically. The United States can best advance its national interests through a more integrated strategic approach to its national security and civil space interests. International civil space cooperation, space commerce, and international space security discussions could be used to reinforce each other in ways that would advance U.S. interests in the sustainability and security of all space activities. It's well recognized that many of today's most important geopolitical challenges and opportunities lie in Asia. Asian space agencies have shown a common interest in lunar missions as a logical next step beyond low Earth orbit. Such missions are seen as ambitious but achievable and thus more practical than missions to Mars and more distant locations. They offer an opportunity for emerging and established spacefaring countries to advance their capabilities without taking on the political risks of a competitive race with each other. A multinational program to explore the moon as a first step would be a symbolic and practical means of creating a broader international framework for space cooperation. At the same time, the geopolitical benefits of improving intra-Asian relations and U.S. engagement could support more ambitious space explorations than science alone might justify. Europeans were also interested in being part of a return to the moon, and as recently as June of this year, Russia proposed a lunar program with the United States and publicly supported this position at international conferences. There are many geopolitical, scientific, exploration, commercial, and educational objectives that could be achieved at the moon. And in contrast, the case for a human mission to an asteroid is unpersuasive and unsupported by technical or international realities. We should be visionary, but focused on practical actions. The exploration and development of space is a reflection of the values we hold as a nation. It is those values that are probably the most important to the long term for defining what NASA is and what space exploration is truly about. It's not just our DNA and our robots that go out there, it's our values. We are a nation not defined by blood, tribe, or religion, but by conscious choice. Our choices are defined by adherence to the Constitution and the values of a tolerant culture, a democratic society, and a market-driven economy. In shaping the international environment for space activities, the United States should seek to build a more secure, stable, and prosperous world in which our values are taken beyond the Earth. In doing so, we should also exercise some humility in face of the unknown. Did Thomas Jefferson know the ultimate economic return or impact from the investment in the Louisiana Purchase and the Lewis and Clark expedition? Did Teddy Roosevelt in sending the Great White Fleet and building the Panama Canal? Did Kennedy with Apollo? In their time, these projects were controversial and criticized in Congress, but who today would say that we should not have been done? Through the long lens of history, we see that these efforts define us as a nation that pioneers the next frontier. Let me conclude by observing that we are all in this together. The White House, Congress, U.S. government agencies, our international partners, space stations, science community, universities, research centers, and the many U.S. companies that create and operate our nation's capability. Thus, I really commend and thank this committee for holding this hearing today. Thank you for your attention, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
And thank you, Dr. Pace. I thank you, all of you, for your testimony, and I remind members that the committee rules limits questioning to 5 minutes for each of us. I'll open the round of questioning and recognize myself for 5 minutes. As I sit here, I don't ever like to say it's my last day. This is the last day for this week, at least. First, I don't like anything last. I don't even like for them to call an airport a terminal. That doesn't sound good to me, but at my age. But I'm just thinking of the wonderful testimony all of y'all have given, and the time that it took you together to have that, and then to gather up on it and then deliver it to us. It's really great of you and generous of you. I go back to, and I glean from each of you that there's need for more funds. The Norm Augustine Committee recommended, if you remember, Bob, $3 billion additional for NASA and per year. That wouldn't even brought us up to 1% of the overall budget, and that's a shame. 3 presidents turned their backs on us on that when we asked them for that additional money. Things could be different today, I think, had we been able to edge that into the budget for NASA. We needed it. And Bob, you suggested several modifications, and Administrator Blakey, thank you. I have a question or so. General, let me ask you, General Sega, what reaction, if any, has your committee received from the administration with regard to the recommendations you lay out? And I liked your recommendations. Specifically, you cite a need for a new national consensus for NASA's future. Does the administration agree with such a consensus is needed? Or can you answer that?
Mr. Chairman, the report was briefed last week to a NASA administrator and staff, and I believe it was well received. We have not briefed any other elements of the administration besides NASA.
Okay. Let me ask Dr. Pace.
Excuse me, I stand corrected there. We also briefed Dr. Holdren at OSTP.
Okay.
And
what was their reaction?
Okay. In the
they kind of speak for the president, I think, sometimes.
Correct, and they were mostly in the listening mode, and okay. Again, it wasn't they hadn't gone through it in detail, yeah. But we would present our recommendations, and so we would await their reaction.
Okay, Dr. Pace, your testimony points out how potential international partners have been confused by a lack of clear space goals and priorities, and especially by the cancellation of plans to return to the moon without a viable alternative. Why don't you elaborate on why the moon is a more appropriate step for our international partners than an asteroid or Mars? Or to me, the space station is #1, is so important, and if we can't do that, we can't do anything. And we absolutely lose our international partners. That's the next thing that everybody points out. But how to keep them? We need more money, and I think it's too late to ask for that additional billion, or that would help us. The $3 billion that was suggested by a man that has led every study, I guess, that's ever been made for this committee. Does the administration, you will know whether or not the consensus is needed. Does NASA believe that a consensus is needed? That's the old question. NASA? Yeah, I understand that one.
Sir, would you like me to answer the international question or the NASA question?
The NASA question.
Well, I think that not being with NASA, of course, today, as I look at NASA from the outside, I think that they, in fact, do feel frustrated by the disconnects between the White House and Congress. They, of course, would like to have some clearer direction and support. But I think that if you ask them as representatives of the administration, I think they would say, well, we have a direction, we have a policy. and we're trying to execute that policy as best we know how. The problem is that I think the policy, particularly in civil space exploration, is disconnected from technical and political realities. I completely agree with you that the space station is the most vital, immediate thing we have to be focused on, but then we have to be looking what comes after the space station. And this is where I think our international partners feel a bit left out, because Mars and asteroids are extremely challenging. They're extremely challenging for us. And as a result, when they look at themselves and they look at their own agencies, they don't see a way for meaningful international cooperation with us on those programs, certainly in the manned side of things. And therefore, they are left really without a way forward to work with us. And I think that hurts us, because the consensus, I think, in the U.S. community is that international cooperation is essential to any explorations beyond low Earth orbit. Nobody thinks we're going to repeat the Apollo program going there by ourselves. And so it makes sense to ask, what can our international partners do? What are they capable of doing? And we really haven't provided a hook for our partners in the current policy. That leads to the disconnect with larger geopolitical interests, which then leads to the sense of drift that I think NASA feels.
We know we can go to the moon. How do you feel about putting major emphasis on the space station and not forgetting that we want to go to Mars, or that we intend to go to Mars, and keep an ear open to that, but not to be asking for vast, expensive, and great amounts of money that it's going to take to do that until we perfect reaching our own space station and claim back our space station that we're almost turning their back on by having to beg the Russians for a trip up there and back.
No, I think that if one does not support the space station well, I mean, anything else is kind of meaningless. In the aftermath of the Columbia accident, we had very serious conversations with our international partners as to whether or not they wanted to stop and just simply call it a day. And they were very, very clear that we had to continue with the space station. They had made these commitments to it. It was not practical to talk about other international cooperation if, in fact, we failed at the station. So I think the number one issue, and I think also as part of my written testimony, utilization of the space station is the nearer-term issue. Ensuring access to the station with high reliability is the top issue for ensuring utilization. One of the concerns, this is maybe a whole separate discussion, is on the sustainability of the station with the rather fragile logistics support that we have right now. The new commercial cargo capabilities that are coming online are extremely critical, extremely necessary. If there is any faltering or delays in that, we are going to be looking at the potential for having to maybe reduce the manning on the space station. And if that happens, then we're going to be looking at our utilization going down.
And I thank you, sir. My time has expired. This time I recognize Mrs. Edwards for her Ms. Johnson for her 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and let me thank each of the witnesses for extraordinary testimony. I'm sitting here in sort of a state of frustration when I think that this committee is expected to be the visionary committee, and also I feel very strongly that our future in research, development, and innovation rests with what we recommend or what we do. And I want an opinion. We're not appropriators on this committee, but we are very mindful of the fact that we have very little money. But I still think that with the help of experts, we can at least lay out what we consider the vision for our country's research and innovation through space research, and then allow the administration or the appropriators to determine what we can and cannot do. I think that currently there's so much frustration as to where NASA is concerned that they really don't know what's coming next. Just looking at what has happened so far, in space exploration research, it is clear to me that where we are now came almost exclusively, but certainly from space exploration research. I believe that to stop and decide we can't afford it is simply saying to our future, we won't be there. We won't be there for our young people. We won't be there for the inspiration. We're just going to take a back seat and watch the rest of the world. We won't need to educate our young people if we're not going to give some opportunity for participation. So I guess my question is, how would you help us? We see through much of your testimony, come to a real recommendation that speaks to what we consider to be the need for the future rather than just the money. We know it costs, but we've got to make some real serious decisions. And I don't think we can half-step it. We've got to decide that we're going to invest in our future and eliminate the need for food stamps, or whether we can continue to pay for more and more and more food stamps. And so I am very, very concerned, because I know that we are very sensitive to the cost on this committee, and we should be. But we really are not the appropriators. We're the visionaries. We're the people who are supposed to be looking to see what our nation needs to keep pace and to continue to be leaders. So I need to know if you will give me some of your opinions on where you really think we ought to be. If we had, if we were brave enough to say, this is what we need, take it or leave it, Mr. President. Anybody? Mr. Walker, why don't you start?
Well, I agree with absolutely with your premise, and I think that the role that the government has to play in NASA is to assure that its missions are future-oriented. And I think we've spent an awful lot of money in recent years on essentially operational issues and so on. What this committee could do is give us a sense of direction. I mean, do we go back to Mars? Do we do some of these kinds of things? But in order to do that, then you have to commit yourself to some high-risk technologies. Because in my view, it's extremely important that you, for instance, reduce the time that it takes to go to Mars if you're going to do it. The only way it's politically viable is if you can go there in weeks rather than years. The fact is we could develop technologies along those lines, but it's going to take the committee's decision in your authorization process to give NASA those kinds of instructions to move it forward. And what I was suggesting in my testimony is that then there are ways to reach out for some of the other things that you're doing for money. Since I left Congress, I've been involved with an FFRDC. You'll notice that in the Aldrich Commission report, they recommended that at least some of the NASA centers move to that kind of model. Why? Well, because at that point you can have both a government funding stream going into the operation, as well as outside money coming in to the operation to do other things. And that allows you then to have some streams of money that do not necessarily depend upon the appropriations process. I don't know if that's exactly the right model for NASA, but it seems to me that this committee working could come up with something along those lines. That allows you then to look forward as well as to find the resources necessary, not wholly government resources. And that's what I'm trying to suggest in the testimony. I think that's possible. I've worked with a number of these startup companies that are looking to do really exciting things. They would love to have NASA as a partner. And you have got to figure out a way to find the ways for NASA to be able to do that partnership on a very, very routine basis.
Thank you. I know my time has expired, but yours have not, so I will relent and let them answer.
If I could follow that comment, our study task stated that any recommendations made by the committee will be predicated on the assumptions that NASA's out-year budget profile will be constrained due to continuing deficit reduction. So we looked at a budget-constrained environment. We do believe, and we concur with what you were saying in terms of the long-term view, and that strategic goals and objectives are a starting point, and that there is a consensus about those strategic goals and objectives. For example, as we had many witnesses and did our work, we found little evidence that an asteroid mission, for example, was widely accepted, whether inside of NASA, outside in industry or internationally, and so it's important that there's clarity in terms of the direction, and then NASA's strategic plan can, in fact, with clarity, identify what the trades are in that portfolio going forward, and there is a starting point upon which some choices can be made.
I think you'll find industry also joining with others on the panel saying that absolutely partnerships, the ability to bring together public and private sector and international conjoining resources is certainly an excellent step in the right direction, that if this committee, through the upcoming reauthorization process, because I would remind us all that it's not so far away again, that you all are going to have to tackle that, would be excellent. I also would say that regardless of destination, because there are conflicting views about destination, as you even hear on this panel, let's keep in mind that building the capabilities to get into deep space, the ability both in terms of heavy launch as well as crew capsules, and tackling some of the research that's dawning right now still. We don't have all the answers on deep space radiation, for example, and issues of bone density. So there's some critical research that's got to be continued. But remember, when they supported the F-1 rocket back in the 50s, they didn't know where they were going to go, but it made all the difference. So bear that in mind.
Well, actually, I was motioning to my colleague to the right because I thought that he put his finger on it in terms of the people. That is the combination of small satellites, suborbital missions, zero-G aircraft, things that provide really tangible hands-on experience is the most crucial thing to give people a sense of the future. Sometimes when it's said to me, it says, well, you know, we've been to the moon already, I usually have to respectfully say, well, my father's generation went to the moon. We have not gone to the moon. That generation is past. We need to build and rebuild the people with the expertise. One of the most exciting things about the commercial industries and the partnerships that Congressman Walker noted is that opportunity to provide for hands-on real hardware and real flight experience, for which there is no substitute. And so I think the building of capabilities, whatever destinations we want to go for, obviously I'm a partisan of a particular approach. None of that is possible without hands-on expertise, and I thought my colleague really nailed that one.
The gentlelady yields back her time, and I think that was a very good question that you asked, and I'm sorry that question wasn't put to the President of the United States before he ran a line through Constellation, or if he hadn't talked to Bob Walker, or to General Sega, some of you who know much about what's going on, or Norm Augustine, for one, who always said what we needed, but we needed the funds for it, and the funds we needed and were requested were turned down. So we go from that. This time I recognize Mr. Sensenbrenner for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. NASA was created in the 50s in reaction to the Soviet Union launching Sputnik 1, which ignited a space race. Beginning with the Mercury program, NASA's focus on putting humans into space served as its most high-profile and arguably the most exciting facet of the agency. Mission-oriented manned space programs have been the prism through which we judge the agency, and mission orientation back 40 years ago excited a group of students to go into STEM education, which we now call it today, and got us a generation of scientists and engineers. The Space Shuttle, however, flew its last mission in 2011, and there's now a gap in domestic spaceflight capabilities. Instead, we rely on the Russian Space Agency to ferry American astronauts to the space station. The Bush administration began the Constellation program to serve as the shuttle's successor, but President Obama canceled the program. Fortunately, Congress has continued to see the importance of the heavy lift rocket system and mandated the space launch system in the Orion program in the 2010 NASA authorization bill. Dr. Pace, I appreciate your comment that the Stimulus Act appropriated more funds in one act than this country has spent on NASA since its creation in 1958. And budgets and spending are an example of priorities. And in terms of having the seeds to continue United States preeminence, not just in manned space programs, but in terms of science and inventions and everything else that goes along with it, ended up being washed away in the flood of stimulus funds. Now, as this hearing has highlighted already, the President's approach to human spaceflight lacks a clear mission, and he is relying on the success of commercial space, which I agree is vital, but has dragged his feet on pushing human spaceflight at NASA. I strongly support a public-private partnership for our country's space policy. However, it's up to NASA to develop the heavy lift rocket because the private sector doesn't have enough funds to do it by itself. And that heavy lift rocket needs enough thrust to overcome the administration's short-sightedness. Now, by canceling the Constellation program, NASA has lost its international partners who supported a mission to the moon. President Obama has taken a been-there, done-that approach, but we haven't been there for 40 years, and the international partners who would have helped us have never been there. If we cannot lead the world in space, China and Russia will inevitably feel the void that we left behind, and that will have a trickle-down effect on the number of people that we train as scientists and engineers to keep America's preeminence not in space but in practically everything else. So, Dr. Pace, would you please discuss the problems caused by the cancellation of the Constellation program and what's needed from Congress in this current fiscal environment to ensure the success of the Space Launch System and Orion?
Okay. Thank you, sir. That's a tall order. I think one of the crucial things that the Constellation program was supposed to do was to provide a smooth transition for the workforce and for the capabilities the nation had off of the shuttle program to whatever came next.
And we've lost that now.
And we've lost that. And the deep integration between low Earth orbit and farther destinations that was hoped for, I think, is also gone. So I would first say that 2012 is not 2008. We're in a different and new situation today, and we have to look at going forward. One of the primary problems, though, with the end of Constellation was, again, cutting ourselves off from our international partners who didn't see how they were going to participate, increasing risk to the International Space Station, because while we certainly hope for and encourage and want to see the private sector take over that work, if there are delays, if there are problems, we don't really have a fallback option. So we are down to really a few critical paths for supporting the station. And so the complementary nature between commercial programs and the Constellation program, I thought, was one of its strengths. The lack of a clear rationale for human exploration beyond the International Space Station is another serious problem. The administration's approach of being capability driven, while it has a certain logic to it, it also has a lot of vulnerabilities. And historically, I think that a more strictly geopolitical approach, such as I've talked about a post-Cold War approach for leading international cooperation, would in fact be a better approach for the United States. There are some others that one could take, but simply talking about capabilities absent a strategic rationale that's integrated with other U.S. national interests, I think is a very, very fraught path, as we're seeing today.
Thank you. My time has expired.
Chair now recognizes a gentleman from Minnesota, Michigan, Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Funding for NASA is very important for many reasons, but especially investment in NASA creates jobs. If we want to increase funding to NASA, we've got to speed up our nation's economic recovery, and I have a couple of bills that I believe provide a very cost-effective way to strengthen our economic competitiveness, and that would be to invest in the city that symbolizes both U.S. manufacturing and has the assets to help make our country's economic capability stronger, and that is the city of Detroit. The city of Detroit is currently in fiscal constraints. It's facing its own fiscal cliff. I will be soon introducing a bill that will allow the city to refinance its considerable debt at a lower interest rate, saving money and likely stabilizing that city's financial situation. Furthermore, I'm proposing to eliminate capital gains tax on income on investment made in that city as a way to spur investment. Saying that, in the city of Detroit, we have an extraordinarily high number of people who have lost hope because they're not working. Yet, throughout the metropolitan Detroit region, we have many employers who have thousands of jobs that are going unfilled because they can't find people skilled and qualified to be hired into those jobs. We have a skills gap in metropolitan Detroit as well as in this country. Dr. Zurbuchen from University of Michigan, I know that you understand these economic challenges that we're facing in southeastern Michigan. How do you believe that investing in NASA innovation could help us close that skills gap?
Thanks so much for this question, Congressman. I'm the first university graduate in my family. The only reason I studied science, which is what I did, and the only reason I came to this country is because of the investment this committee or committees ahead of it have made decades ago, and because of the inspiration that came from the space program. I believe that that power of inspiration in investments that come from this has a tremendous effect on the youth, on the young high school student who is making decisions for her career and the future that she has in front of her, seeing that it is possible to make these dreams a reality. So I do believe the inspiration aspect of NASA is a really important part and remains a very powerful force that this committee should consider. Once we get them through the high schools and into our universities, I believe the kind of diverse portfolio that I mentioned, the hands-on experience, explains to our students that technology and progress is not so much just about talking about ideas, it's about making these ideas happen. And you should be interested in knowing that, for example, at the University of Michigan with this last year, something like 5,000 engaged students in entrepreneurial activities, aerospace is the third most represented theme, following only biomedical and kind of computer science, the ones you would have guessed perhaps initially. Aerospace is hugely represented because of the reasons that Congressman Walker and others have mentioned, the tremendous power of the ability of actually putting these companies out there trying to really have new approaches or landing that rover on Mars. Some of my students were engaged in that. So I believe the hands-on experience that comes from these funded programs from NASA are a second aspect, and that a very important solution that you're mentioning. The jobs are coming. We have startups in aerospace. Some of these really surprising kind of changes from technology that was developed under NASA auspices, for example, technology that are now investigating under cities' sewer systems using robotics technology that was developed in NASA. General Motors, a company that you're very much aware of, having tremendous autonomy lessons learned in collaboration with NASA through these public-private partnerships that led to the robot on the space station. So I believe that there's multi-pronged aspects that will lead directly to the bottom, not just to the bottom line, to the top line, to what our economy does and what the jobs are that are being created, both in Michigan but all over the country.
Thank you, Doctor. Mr. Chair, do I have time for another question?
I beg your pardon?
I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. Chair now recognizes Chairman Smith for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Sega, let me address my first question to you. Your report showed that there is not much support in the scientific and space community for a mission to a near-Earth asteroid in 2025. Is such a mission absolutely necessary to help us get to Mars, or are there alternatives? And are there alternative missions as well that could replace that mission to the asteroid?
As we looked at the human mission to an asteroid that is in the 2010 National Space Policy of the U.S., in addition to it not having being widely accepted, there were some shortcomings noted by some of the people that appeared before the committee. A note is that as we look back in time, there have been several presidents that have talked about Mars. The rhetoric toward that as a destination was noted by the committee. We also recognize that there are different paths that one could go if that was, in fact, the chosen destination for a human mission, and that it would maybe look at integrating some of the other aspects of NASA's work. For example, if that was the strategic goal, then you would look at the robotic missions that would support going there. You would have the...
General Sega, do you think we should reconsider that mission to the near-Earth asteroid?
The committee didn't address that directly, but there were many questions that concerned that as the path forward.
Okay.
Other work in terms of technology, aeronautics, getting to the atmosphere of Mars and out of our atmosphere, and science could be focused on these strategic goals and objectives.
Okay, thank you for that. Dr. Pace, what do you think the American people would like for us to do in space? Obviously, the Hubble is popular. Curiosity has generated a great amount of interest. More specifically, how do you determine that coincidence between popular support and missions that are scientifically justified and missions that can be justified by budget constraints as well? Sure.
One of the patterns you see in public opinion support is U.S. public opinion has been actually remarkably stable for space activity. It was never as large as people thought it was during Apollo, and it's never been low as people thought about afterwards. So the American public have a sense, I think, of that we're an exploring nation, we're a pioneering nation, and they expect or assume that our leadership is, in fact, doing that and working on it, and they trust that that is happening. So when things like the shuttle program ended without really a clear path after that, there was somewhat of a sense of sort of shock or concern, not because they agreed or preferred one path or another, but because they sensed, well, wait a minute, isn't someone working on this? Isn't there a path forward? The getting to specific missions, I think what you see over and over again is people have an interest in life. They have an interest in people, the sense of a direct. So when there is the possibility of organic life on Mars, you see lots of interest, much to the disappointment sometimes of the geologists who think they're doing important work too. Right. But life science and that sense of personal connection, space tourism, which is talked about, that sense of personal participation and connection is what I think the American people.
Would you put in that category Earth-like planets?
Absolutely, absolutely. The growth of the number of Earth-like planets to the Kepler mission has been very, very exciting. I think that with the James Webb Space Telescope, to see deeper into the galaxy and things we've never seen before will inspire that sense of wonder that the American people assume that their country is going to be a leader in doing.
Okay, I agree with that. Thank you, Dr. Pace. And Congressman Walker, final question for you. How do we determine the balance between robotic and human missions There are advantages and disadvantages to both, but is there any way to try to achieve that balance?
Well, I think clearly that there needs to be an understanding of what humans can do best and what robots can do best. The robots give us tremendous amounts of information, but in general, they find what we sent them there to find. It's based upon our belief of what they might be capable of finding. Humans have the advantage of going and finding things that we never expected to find and never expected to see. Someone said the other day that the two small rovers that were on the Mars for many months did in the whole time that they were there, or the whole time that they've been there, about the same amount of work that one human could do in a day and a half. Because it is, in fact, it's the human ability to process information in remarkable ways that's needed. And so I think you do strike a balance. The precursor missions are always going to be robotic, probably. There are tremendous science missions that you can do with robots. But in the end, you want to put humans into a place where humans can find only those things that humans are capable of finding.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm aware of Mr. Walker's problem, space and time-wise. We excuse you at this time.
I'm fine, Mr. Chairman.
You okay?
I've had my office tell my appointment that I will reschedule with them and so on. So I'm fine for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Curson, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all of you that testified with this excellent testimony. I'm from an industry that's benefited much from NASA and the technologies and everything that they've spawned from their research and the brilliance that come out of there. I come from the auto industry, and everything from metals to paint to weight. And I truly hope that NASA gets a long-term presence that they're looking for, because it benefits this entire country. But also the stimulus that we've talked about that's been kicked around here a little bit saved that same industry I came out of, and had it not been for that stimulus, we might have been in a depression and not be able to talk about any funding. So with that out, I'd like to direct a question to General Sega. You testified that NASA needs personal flexibility, including the ability to conduct reductions in force and hire contractors rather than civil servants in select instances. I'd like to know if this is because there isn't a long-term commitment to the program and you need to be flexible with bringing people in or out, or do you believe even if there is a long-term commitment, if that would be your strategy on personnel? And what provisions can NASA make for the retraining of those highly educated NASA scientists and technicians if you end up with a glut of those people, which there's going to be right now, from what I understand. And is the commercial market large enough to absorb these scientists and these highly skilled people that was trained with tax dollars, and they're going to carry knowledge that nobody else possesses that could be valuable to our country? Can the market absorb those?
Congressman, as we looked at one of our tasks was to examine NASA's organizational structure and identify changes that can improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the mission activities. So that's how we address that. As you arrive at new strategic objectives and goals, and then NASA creates a strategic plan to accomplish those, we recommend the flexibility, not necessarily, how it would turn out in terms of the ability to look at personnel and infrastructure aligned with these strategic goals and objectives in an implementation plan. So we did note that the Jet Propulsion Lab is an FFRDC type structure, and it is contract folks there that are engaged in many aspects of research development and operations for their their satellites. Different centers had a different mix in terms of contractors and civil servants. There were about 4 of them that were about 50-50. There's about 3 of them that were quite high in terms of contractors to NASA civil servants. One that was higher in terms of civil servants than contractors. But it was more of that flexibility of doing what that center would be expected to accomplish in a more integrated way. And so it was the flexibility rather than a specific solution that we're recommending.
American energy companies. How do we ensure that NASA's research talent pool and facilities are not acquired by foreign interests that may be harmful to our national interest? I guess the General would direct that toward you again.
That was not addressed in our study in terms of the U.S. versus foreign ownership of companies.
And I believe you testified in your written statement that NASA's infrastructure flexibility, the ability to dispose of property it no longer needs, would this be included in what could be purchased by foreign countries?
I don't recall that we specified or even considered in our deliberations the nature of the entity that would be a potential buyer of the facility. I do want to give you an example of a visit that I made to Plumbrook. It's in Ohio, where they have a large chamber and they test fairings separations. And a great facility. Some of NASA's missions need that, but it is a facility that also has the capacity for other work. And so it was ESA that had looked at doing some of the work in that facility. They were also discussing with JAXA and SpaceX to do work in that facility, and so it would be some aspects may be appropriate for a sale, but others may be just greater utilization of the facility in more creative ways.
Thank you. If I may, one question to Congressman Walker. You talked about the possibility of for-profit companies joining in with NASA on particular research. We all know there's great minds out there right now thinking about farming in space and mining in space, which would be great projects to work together. Are there really companies out there that could afford the funding to do that research, to join in with NASA, to help NASA become a viable program for the long term?
Absolutely. I mean, you have companies right now that are creating spacecraft that you do have working relationships with NASA, but would love to have closer relationships and look toward the future. We announced a company just last week that is looking to go to the moon. Certainly NASA's expertise in that area would be invaluable, and these are companies who are perfectly prepared to pay NASA for utilization of their facilities and utilization of their talent. And so there are lots of opportunities out there that could be expanded even more into the future. You mentioned the automobile industry. The automobile industry is in the process of developing autonomous vehicles. Nobody has done more elaborate work on autonomous vehicles than NASA has done. My guess is that there have been some partnerships in that, but those are partnerships that could be expanded.
Yep. Thank you, Congressman. I yield any time I might have left.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Palazzo, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Hall. The hearing today is especially appropriate considering the upcoming NASA reauthorization and some of the recent bills we've passed, including the indemnification bill that so many on this committee wanted to see and supported. As has already been expressed here by other members and our witnesses, I'm concerned with the vision for NASA going forward and the budget issues that are causing such grief in our short and long-term programs and missions. What are our long-term goals for NASA? How will we form a strategy that takes into account all NASA initiatives from space and earth sciences, human space exploration, and aeronautics to STEM education? The NRC report attempted to answer these questions and discuss some of the paths NASA could take. None of them will be easy, and our job will only become more difficult as budgets shrink. NASA, the administration, and Congress must do a better job of informing the American people about the important work NASA does and the overwhelming benefits our society reaps as a result. Maintaining our space leadership in the world is extremely important and is worth investing in. But we must not forget that an investment in NASA is also an investment in research and development for future technologies. NASA has a proven record and thousands of examples in the everyday technologies we simply could not live without in 2012. I'd like to remind everyone of the speech that President Kennedy gave at Rice University in 1962. He addressed the U.S. effort to put a man on the moon and used that famous line, and I'm paraphrasing, but Kennedy said, "We did these things not because they are easy, but because they are hard." The questions we must answer and the choices that must be made are anything but easy. But like Kennedy, we should not shrink back from them simply because they are hard. NASA must step up to this challenge or it risks its legacy of success and leadership in space. That's not an outcome anyone in this room wants to see happen. So I thank you all for sharing your comments with us today, and I believe I may have time for one question. So, Ms. Blakey, given the end of the shuttle program and the lack of a clear strategic direction, how does the uncertainty threaten our industrial base, and can you characterize the capabilities that are at risk and perhaps even give us some examples?
Well, certainly. The cancellation of Constellation was extremely disruptive from the industrial base standpoint. At one point, we had more than 12,000 contractors working down there. At this point, it's right at 1,000 and diminishing. All of those people, their skills, expertise go elsewhere, and frankly, may very well go into other industries. So we're extremely concerned that there be the kind of stability, the kind of long-term programs, and ones that really do tap the outer edge of design talent, the kind of R&D that is really fundamental for us to maintain our global leadership, because that's what is at stake behind the many, many companies, universities, et cetera, that are all combining to support our space program.
How do you replace that lost talent? Is there a cost in a financial cost, and is there a cost in time as well? I mean, will there not be a gap before we could possibly replace that talent?
There could very well be, and we're quite worried about that, because as much as we support STEM programs at all levels of education, you still have to have the opportunities for young people to see in front of them that appear to be important and exciting. And if those opportunities aren't clear when they're making choices, whether it's, high school, graduate school, et cetera, they will definitely go elsewhere. And we do not see the kind of upsurge that we should be seeing in engineering and other science talent right now. It's a problem. And we have a huge amount of retirees in the industry. We have an aging population. So we're going to see a real bathtub, if you will. We don't have the kind of people we need, especially as we have to step it up.
Thank you for your answer to my question. I would like to, just in all fairness, I do have a couple more questions, but I'm going to yield back my time. But I would like to say I do agree with our colleague from Detroit. I believe he stepped out. I'm all in favor of eliminating the capital gains tax, but not just for Detroit, but for every American. So thank you. I yield back.
Okay, Chair now recognizes Mrs. Bonamici of Oregon for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses for your testimony. I wanted to follow up on some of the discussion we've already been having about education, especially STEM education, and Mr. Clark brought up the skills gap. But I also want to talk a little bit about the importance of educating the public about the benefits of the space program. And there's some testimony that's been provided that begins to touch on this. Ms. Blakey, you talk in your testimony about how space programs have improved our lives, from vaccination research to guiding first responders to weather satellites and missile detection satellites. And then Dr. Zurbuchen, I hope I got your name right or close. You talk about how do we define the purpose and meaning behind exploration of space within a society that does not always see a tangible benefit. And Dr. Pace, you say that in today's environment with massive debt and an anemic economic recovery, sustaining discretionary expenditures for civil space exploration will be especially challenging unless there is a clearer rationale linking such efforts to broader national interests that can be supported in a bipartisan manner over many years. So I know there's been some discussion already about the skills gap and of course, STEM education. I want to point out that the role of NASA in promoting STEM education should be more clearly articulated in NASA's strategic plan. But what I'd like you to talk about is what, if anything, is the industry doing to convey to the public the benefits of space exploration? In other words, how can the contributions of our space program to national interests be communicated not just to stakeholders but also to the public at large? And Ms. Blakey, if you would like to start, please.
I thank you very much for the opportunity to expand on that a bit, because we did put a great deal of effort into this brand new report called Space in Our World, which, believe me, we will make certain that every member of this Congress and the new Congress has a copy, because you are all ambassadors on this front. But we've also looked at the fact that through social media, this can be accessible to every American. We've been tweeting it. We've been putting out specific nuggets, if you will, of examples. We're looking to excite young people in the universities, because there are examples in here of where work in a variety of universities and the private sector have kicked off enormous benefits for our society. So I simply would say that it is something that I think we need to do a better job on, because I do not believe the public has any idea how in their daily life, everyday life, they are over and over again using the work that comes out of our NASA programs and our space programs broadly, including NRO and some of our classified programs. It all moves out eventually into the economy, and it's been a huge spur for the economy.
Thank you. I look forward to seeing the report. Anyone else care to add to that? Dr. Pace?
I would say sort of from the experience of being at the university, and I teach both graduate and undergraduate students, and many of them come and take courses in space and space policy who are not space enthusiasts. They're international affairs students, political science majors, economics people. And to me, it's always very gratifying as they hear about the relationship of space to the economy and the relationship to our international relations. Just how critical they realize this subject is. Many of them will come and say, you know, after going through the course, they walk outside and they have a new perspective on the sky above them. They had no idea that all these things were going on overhead. Remote sensing, GPS systems, communication satellites, how deeply embedded space is in the entire critical infrastructure of the planet. And it's almost invisible. But then once they realize that's there, they take on a new appreciation for it. They take on an appreciation for the immense symbolism that space has and how it represents our strategic relationships with our allies, such as Japan and Europe, how the Clinton administration used bringing the Russians into the space station program, very controversial, but as a way of symbolizing a post-Soviet relationship with them. So the really macro sweep of international affairs, the centrality to the economy, is something that students then come to know and appreciate. I don't know how to do that for the public as a whole, but I know we can certainly do it for students, and it happens over and over and over again as soon as they see that and as soon as it's laid out for them.
Well, thank you. And Major General, go ahead. I have a few seconds left.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to note that our committee did look at that as well, and NASA, in our view, is making some very positive steps in the communication with regard to social media, for example, and their STEM programs. I personally was one of those that were inspired as a young boy living in northeastern Ohio during the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo programs to study math and science, and ended up taking my first airplane ride in my life from from Cleveland, Ohio to Denver, Colorado to go to the Air Force Academy. I had never been in an airplane prior to that time. But in our study, we also looked at the events that are clear and compelling, such as landing of Curiosity, that the communications to the public was outstanding. And so in route to identifying clear strategic objectives and goals, and then developing a strategic plan for NASA, some of that story becomes clearer and easier to tell.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm out of time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Gentlelady yields back her time. Congressman Brooks, Alabama, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Zurbuchen and also Ms. Blakey, your testimony, in particular Dr. Zurbuchen, highlights the importance of maintaining the pipeline of engineers and scientists to ensure that we continue to innovate in the future. With respect to both of you, what are your recommendations for a program that provides opportunities to our graduate and postdoctoral students to the benefit of future U.S. leadership in space?
Thanks so much, Congressman. My personal feeling is that such a program would be hugely advantageous for this nation and could in many ways, in fact, enable ideas that were talked about on this panel. I think in general, we have tremendous interest in some of our talent to really engage in this, and such a program that you mentioned, I think, would be very positively reacted upon.
I must also tell you, because I've had the opportunity to go to almost all of NASA's centers around the country as a member of the NASA Advisory Council, I have been very, very impressed with the degree to which local university talent is integrated into many of the NASA programs. JPL, there is practically no one under 30, it appears, as you go around the entire facility. So, I mean, there is a big emphasis on trying to pull in young people, both at the undergraduate and graduate level. I will also recommend this. If you all haven't seen two videos that are out there, both stemming from the Curiosity rover, I would recommend them. One, of course, is 7 Minutes of Terror, but it has relatively young engineers talking about that 7 minutes when they did not know whether, in fact, the Curiosity rover was on Mars. And the other one is a very funny rap video, again, done by young people in the NASA framework, all about how exciting it is to work at NASA and how exciting it is to be involved in the space program. Those things are getting millions of hits on YouTube. So there's a lot going on that some of us, at least I don't often see.
Do you have any specific suggestions of what the federal government should be doing to encourage STEM education at the collegiate level or postgraduate level?
My personal recommendation would be to focus on these modest and small-scale programs with tremendous emphasis, and really make sure that, for example, suborbital programs and programs that support small-scale missions as well as explorer programs and so forth are funded at the level that really makes the substantial impact that we have, that it can have towards talent development. In my opinion, there's no other investment at the collegiate level that will have more impact relative to just a hands-on experience in the development of talent for industry and for NASA than investments like that.
I also would say that you see a great deal of emphasis now in industry on pairing with universities on specifically focused programs that often involve research for undergraduates. It can take them all the way into the graduate level with internships in the summertime in those companies, and going back into the university where the curriculum is also tailored to becoming professional with a high degree of expertise in one or another of these subspecialties. So there's a lot more that is no longer generalized, but is really going into the engineering schools and saying, let us help you teach so that people come out with very concrete interests and ambitions at the end that are highly marketable.
All right, Congressman Walker, General Sega, and Dr. Pace, briefly, legislation has been introduced calling for lengthening the term of the NASA administrator as a way to help stabilize NASA's strategic direction. Testimony that we've heard makes it clear that the largest problem is not at the NASA level. It's a problem of national leadership and coming to a consensus between the White House and the Congress. In your judgment, would a longer term for the NASA administrator have a positive effect on NASA?
I think separating the NASA administrator from the political structure of the country would be a mistake. I think that that kind of a situation would keep NASA out of the mainstream of where political thought is going, and I don't think that would be the wise course for the nation to take.
Thank you. General Sega.
Sir, our committee did not address the term of the NASA administrator.
Do you have a judgment, an opinion?
I don't. I haven't thought through it.
That's fine. Thank you. Dr. Pace?
As an academic, I'd answer it depends. I would say I think a slightly longer term or a set term could be useful, but I share Congressman Walker's concern about making sure that there's acceptance of that on part of both the House and the Senate. If that was the judgment of both House and Senate, that a longer term would be part of that stable approach, then I think yes. If there wasn't such agreement, then I don't think it would be terribly useful for the reasons he described.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the time allotted, and also thank you for the opportunity to serve under your leadership over the past 2 years as chairman of this committee. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you. And that might be one thing the House and Senate could agree on. They'd both be against it, I think. I recognize Mr. Miller, the gentleman from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Pace, the answer, it depends, would also qualify you to be a lawyer. Congressman Walker, I was interested in your idea of corporate sponsorships. I'm kind of old-fashioned. I liked it when taxpayer built stadiums were named after our honored war dead instead of selling naming rights. And I just can't quite imagine that picture of Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on the moon, or Ed White walking in space in spacesuits that made them look like NASCAR drivers. So a part of me rebels at it in the first place. But second, I worry about the stability of the funding. We've heard a lot today about the need for stable funding and stable leadership at NASA. Sponsorships, naming rights tends not to be a particularly stable source of funding because corporations merge, they get acquired, they run into trouble, they have to scale back. Will that be a stable source of funding?
Well, certainly there's instability in that, but look, the appropriations process has also been a very unstable source of funding for NASA as well, and so. This is one way of reaching out to bring additional resources into NASA, and it goes further than that. These are industries then that take a huge interest in NASA's activities. People who provide sponsorships then build out. We've been talking here at this table about the need for NASA to be recognized broadly in the community. It's the way of assuring that. You mentioned NASCAR. The companies that provide those sponsorships take a huge interest in what happens in NASCAR, and particularly with the teams that they sponsor. And they are a part of expanding the acceptance of the NASCAR racing well beyond the day's activities on a Sunday at the racetrack. And so this is an opportunity for us to have an outreach that goes to people who actually then have some skin in the game. And I think it could be an extremely important way of bringing resources into an agency that is badly in need of significant resources for the future.
I want to make it clear I wasn't picking a fight with NASCAR. I'm from North Carolina.
I didn't think you would.
I didn't run for re-election, but I do want to be able to go out in public. There's been a lot of discussion of public-private partnerships. Obviously, we do need to think about commercial applications of our space technology and our capabilities. But I worry. We have had proposals, discussions in this committee of privatizing the National Weather Service. which is entirely built with taxpayer-funded research. It's a capability that has been entirely provided as a public service, built by taxpayer funding, and the proposals seem to be coming from a company that wanted to buy the National Weather Service, have monopoly power, and sell the data for a profit. Since there's not an active market in National Weather Services, pricing it seemed to be kind of hard, and the public the problem of having that information provided for a profit by somebody with monopoly power worried me. It struck me as what happened with the sale of state-owned enterprises in companies, industries as the Soviet Union dissolved to oligarchs. I want to make sure we're not taken. How do we make sure that we are not taken in these public-private partnerships, and that we aren't giving a monopoly power for something that perhaps should be provided as a government service?
Well, I would remind you that one of the problems we have with the weather service right now is the fact that they haven't been able to fly their new modern satellites and so on, and we risk a gap in a lot of valuable information going forward because the government hasn't been capable of moving forward. And so, there are problems on both sides. I would say to you that is where the whole issue of oversight of all this activities, where this committee would play an extremely important role in assuring that the kinds of public partnerships that were entered into would in fact be in the public interest. And there are a number of ways that you can write bills to assure that kind of activity. As I mentioned before, you can do it through an FFRDC kind of mechanism where the federal government remains actively involved in what those companies are doing, how those companies are doing their job, and in fact provides an annual stream of funding. So that there are ways of structuring this that would assure that the public interest was still maintained.
Mr. Chairman, my time has expired.
I thank the gentleman. Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Rohrabacher.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and let me also echo the gratitude that I have for having served with you, and you've provided excellent leadership to this committee, and it's been, over the years, it's been just an honor working with you and those who will be leaving us as well. From our last question, let's just note that we have $1 trillion that we're spending more than we're taking in. 1/3 of the federal budget now is debt. I mean, we're increasing in debt. Thus, if we're going to do things in the future, and if NASA or any of the things that we're going to do in the future are to survive and or to actually play an important role in our country's future, we've got to be creative. We've got to be creative. We've got to find new approaches, and that, I think, is the #1 commitment that we've got, because otherwise it's just going to fall apart. And I will have to say that when you have $1 trillion more in debt that you have to deal with, I don't believe the American people are going to put NASA on the top of their priority list, which means we have to be even more creative for those of us who do believe the importance of space-related assets. Let's just note that for the hearing today, we've already talked about how this infrastructure, this invisible infrastructure that we depend upon, I mean, I remember when telephone calls cost so much money. It's been space-based assets that have brought that down. GPS, people have no idea the potential, even future potential, of GPS. We're just now experiencing that, and of course our national security, weather, all that's been talked about. These are all things that deal with space-based assets, and I believe that NASA should be the one who actually is pushing the envelope on what space-based assets will benefit humankind in the future. Let me just note that one thing that is sure, if we are to have space-based assets, we've got to have an environment in space that is capable to use. And today, that is under threat. And if there's anything that NASA, that I would see, that NASA can take a responsibility for, along with a partnership, a global partnership, and lead the way, It's making sure that we clear the debris from space so that we can have space-based assets. If we don't clear the debris will clear us out of space eventually. And we haven't really focused on that. And I think that's something, maybe that's one of those challenges that young people and everybody else can understand. The other challenge, perhaps, I don't know if anybody noticed, let me see if I have the actual number. Yes. Did anyone notice 2012XE54? Anybody notice that? Well, that happened to have been an asteroid that was discovered Sunday and yesterday flew between the Earth and the Moon. That asteroid had the same destructive power as the Tunguska, is that how you pronounce it? What is it? Tunguska asteroid that destroyed hundreds of miles of Siberia about 100 years ago. Yet we didn't discover it till Sunday. Now, those are huge challenges that we need to take up. We're not going to have space-based assets unless we clear the debris, and we're not going to have a safe planet unless we can detect and deflect these type of challenges. I would hope that NASA, Mr. Chairman, if I have any vision for NASA, NASA should be taking up that challenge so that we can use space for the betterment of mankind in the future. And you got 45 seconds to comment on my pontification. Bob, you want to?
Certainly, the issue of space debris is a crucial issue. The commercial industry is facing all kinds of problems these days with monitoring that, and much of what we monitor is larger than some of the particles that could actually cause real damage in space. And so that is a real problem that needs to be addressed. And there are actually some people out there in the private sector that have some interesting ideas about how we could do that.
As our committee looked at the issue of asteroids, I commented on the human mission to them, but also recognized the importance of increasing our understanding of the asteroids. And currently, there's a satellite that's in that area.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Gentleman yields back. I don't believe we have one more here. Chair recognizes Mrs. Edwards from Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I just want to echo how delightful it's been to have you as our chairman for the past couple of years. I really both enjoyed your company and your service on the committee, and so I thank you for that and for tolerating me occasionally. I'm a Twitter follower of NASA's, and I noted that NASA has about 3.2 million followers, which is not insignificant. It's not as much as the president or Oprah, but it's more than the First Lady and RG3 and NASCAR. And so there are people out there who really have an interest in NASA and value NASA, and how we can capture that, I think, so that it also translates into support on a fiscal level, I think, is the challenge, given the range of activity that we expect of the agency. And just this, over this last couple of hours or so, as I'm following my Twitter feeds, then I noted that, one, NASA assures us that the world is not going to end on December 21st, in case anybody wondered, and that the hashtag Curiosity was the 5th most followed or used hashtag over this last year, which says to me that especially the Curiosity, the rover, it is striking some kind of chord in the public. And I think that's actually a good thing for us, because I think it's important for the public to embrace NASA. When I was growing up, our embrace of the agency was because of the Apollo missions. It was sitting in, kindergarten and first grade and whatever those other grades and watching the liftoffs, and that inspired a generation and inspired a nation. And I think Dr. Administrator Blakey, you've pointed out that it requires that kind of public inspiration in order for us to generate the support for the other various of the work that the agency does. I wonder if I want to think outside the box in a way about what it is that we can do to strengthen the fiscal house of the agency. And one of the things I'd like to look at, especially where science is concerned, is that the difficulty the agency has in doing science on a year-by-year basis. It really doesn't make any sense. It's not what you generally find in university and other kind of research, where you know as an investigator where you're starting, what your resources are over a period of time, and then you can plan out the investigation. And some of what we saw, for example, with the James Webb Space Telescope, is that with all of these different, and there were a lot of problems, but all of these different levels of funding from one year to the next year, and not knowing and reprogramming and things, that in fact you have instruments that sit around that aren't supposed to be sitting here because they're supposed to be up there, and then you actually end up over a course of time spending a lot more money. And so I wonder if I could hear from any of you about the idea with respect to scientific funding, agency funding, that we went to, a 2 or a multi-year funding stream just for these programs, understanding that it's different than funding other kinds of things that the government does. And I just wonder if you have some comments about that.
I have currently 8 Ph.D. students who are supported by funding streams that you're talking about. I know firsthand the difficulty of managing these young people's lives in an environment in which decisions can happen on a week-to-week basis, and all of a sudden a certain funding stream disappears. Once we lose a PhD student like this, for example, we cannot really we will do whatever we can as a university to cover that PhD student through, but we have many cases, especially kind of in areas where space interacts with biology in the past, where we lost something like 30, just in our university alone, 30 PhD students in the queue that never came back. And so tools that would create stability in that regard would be tremendously, I think, considered in potential fashion from people like me and others.
Congressman Walker, I wonder if you could comment, you've been in this place, on an idea like that and where we might be able to take it.
Well, I've long believed that we do great damage to our science programs with annual appropriations process. The fact is that that you do have to have a long-term outlook when you're doing science, whether it's space science or bench science. And so we have a real problem in that we have too often scrubbed the authorization process in favor of the appropriations process. I mean, one of the great reforms around this place that would work would be to actually enforce the rules of the Congress that say that you have to have an authorization in place before you can pass an appropriation. Because the fact is we need to have the stability of long-term set policy in order to do science well. And by abandoning authorization process too often, we have put the policy decisions in the hands of the appropriators, and they have a one-year horizon. One-year horizons do not work in science.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
If I might, I would mention one other thing, because there is good precedent for this in terms of some defense programs. The industry would like to see more use of multi-year in terms of complex development programs. But when you look at those in the DoD arena, you do see that it has been an excellent force for holding down costs and having the kind of stability that's needed. So there's precedent.
The chair at this time recognizes, I believe, Mr. Huckner of Illinois for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. And Chairman, I just want to also thank you for your great service and your great work as Chairman. I think it's been a really good couple of years. I've sure enjoyed my time on the Science Committee and wish I could stay longer. I also want to have enjoyed seeing you each time in committee. It reminds me of my funeral director father. What he often says is that it's always better to be seen than to be viewed. And so I appreciate that's my dad's line. But great to be with you and appreciate all that you've done for us and for our committee here. I also want to echo and agree with my friend and colleague, Congressman Edwards, that we've got to start thinking more long-term when it comes to NASA and science. I think it really puts us at a disadvantage to so many other nations who are thinking 5, 10, 20 years in the future. And we're lucky if we're talking 1 year. More oftentimes we're talking about 90 days, a continuing resolution that's just kicking something out a little bit further. We've got to change that, and we've got to reach across the aisle to make sure that happens. So thank you all for being here. This is such an important discussion and something I'm passionate about. I do want to just ask a couple quick questions with the few minutes that I have. First, General Sega, I wonder if I could address to you your thoughts. Would the NRC report have had the same tenor and conclusions if President Obama had not canceled the Constellation program 4 years ago?
The factors that brought us to a point that we talked about in terms of transition was also the terminating the shuttle program, and then something else follows it, and the ability to have a consensus on strategic objectives and goals. This longer-term thinking is important, and to be able to have it for long term. Clearly, it crosses administrations. It crosses terms in Congress, and so the study was prompted by Congress clearly to NASA, and then to the NRC. But the issue of the longer term piece, I think that would be an enduring theme. Regardless of some other events.
I wonder if I could ask the other folks here, starting with Dr. Pace, if you wouldn't mind your thoughts of how you think these results and conclusions would be different if the Constellation program hadn't been canceled.
Well, I think there's really two parts to the disruptions that occurred. One is the Constellation program itself and the industrial base impact, and I think certainly we would have had maybe a slightly different tenor if the program had not been canceled. But the deeper problem really is the policy. Okay, the National Space Policy in 2010, I think, is actually quite a good document. I think it's very thoughtful, very balanced. There's a lot of good material in it. The part that, as a policy professional, sticks out for me is the section on civil space exploration, the asteroid and Mars aspect of it, which to my mind really comes out of a bit of left field. It didn't have an international context. It didn't have a commercial context. It wasn't mindful of the industrial base realities. And so it's really distinct from the rest of the policy. I think if that mistake hadn't been made, I think you could have had a more rational discussion about how to either moderate, change, turn, revamp the Constellation program into a way that would have been then acceptable to the administration going forward. So as in most things, it's really policy choices that are at the root of the issue. What is the strategy you're following? Then the programmatic outcomes and the budgetary outcomes really follow from that. So that's where I would really point.
Thank you. Ask the other three members if you'd have any thoughts on that. I've just about a minute left, but.
Certainly, the variables at the industrial base the companies involved have had to deal with, it's been very difficult. We feel very strongly moving forward that it is important to maintain both the emphasis on commercial crew, commercial resupply for ISS. We've got to keep that on track, and at the same time have the ability through SLS, Orion, to get to deep space. Those two things are parallel tracks, and they are both very important.
I just would comment that I think it has to be recognized that financially the Constellation program was in an unsustainable cost profile, and that it was about to eat alive the science programs and a number of other things inside of NASA at the kinds of costs that it was accumulating. And so, you know, you have to look at it in terms of where would we be in terms of those costs undercutting other NASA programs if it had not gotten the kinds of money that Chairman Hall referred to earlier. Of course it could be done if you gave NASA an additional $3 billion. No one believed that NASA was going to get $3 billion at that point.
Well, again, thank you all for being here. I think these are important discussions. My hope is that we can continue those and really have a great vision for NASA and from NASA into the future. So with that, again, Chairman, thank you for all that you've done for us. I appreciate your service so much and your friendship, and look forward to working together for a long time to come. Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you. You have my assurance that we will work together. And for your undertaker father, let me pass on one to him that my undertaker uses on me. He says, don't worry about it. If you don't like flowers, they'll finally grow on you. So, okay. Now, I think Mr. Clark has asked for recognition.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate the opportunity. And I briefly wanted to ask everyone for their comment on how NASA long-term strategically can work more effectively with the private industry. That's an open-ended question. I'll focus on two specific areas. One with technology transfer, on how the transfer of NASA's research to private industry, maybe to other federal agencies, could play a larger role in our strategic vision for NASA. Dr. Sega, you could, General Sega, you could also address that if you wish. And the other issue is how we can best restructure NASA in a way that would likely need congressional authorization. These are issues that were raised by Chairman Walker with his illustration of, let's say, a sponsorship of one of our missions, although I prefer the Wolverine rover painted in maize and blue. I think would be more appropriate than the GoDaddy rover. But in any event, congressional authorization needed to restructure, to promote the restructuring of NASA that could lead to more effective private partnerships, and how do we strengthen the role of technology transfer in NASA's strategic mission?
Well, quickly, I will give you one. There are a number of ways that you could do this, but the Aldrich Commission recommended that the centers be turned into FFRDC-like operations. That they would have to be modified. Not all the centers do research and development. So, but that they would be structured in a way that would allow them to receive both public money and private money into their operations. And I think that something like that is certainly one of the places it has to look. Look, one of the things that the NRC said was that the alternative to that may have to be the closing of some of the centers, you know, or you know, the reduction of the size of NASA. This is a way that you can begin to look at how do you keep the centers in place, how do you make them into viable economic units inside the communities that they have and for the nation. You know, I think that this committee needs to look at how you might restructure them in a way that allows them to attract both private and public money.
All right, gentlemen, yield back.
Mr. Chair, before I do that, I wanted to thank Ranking Member Johnson for his steadfast leadership, providing me the great opportunity of participating as a freshman member of this panel. Chairman Hall, you're a true gentleman in every respect, and how you've governed this committee in a fair and balanced way. It's been an honor to serve with you and all of you in this country. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. I agree with you completely. You're a gentleman. Thank you. Now, the Chair recognizes Dr. Harris for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the panel for being here today to review really what the strategy is going forward. I'm going to ask for comments on a very particular aspect, and Dr. Zurbuchen and Dr. Pace really, and it leads off what Chairman Walker had said, that, you know, at some point there is important input from manned missions. But to be honest, you know, a lot of the critical things that we're doing, defense-related, weather-related, really there's no manned input necessary. You know, I'm an anesthesiologist. I work in the operating room. You know, the robotic surgery we're doing, you literally could do from around the world. You could have the surgeon sitting around the world from where that machine is actually performing an intricate operation with tactile feedback. I mean, and I don't remember, they have a fancy scientific name for it, but so you actually feel what the tissues feel like. A lot of the inputs that the chairman indicates, you know, that human input actually is now being gained. If you actually talk to, I have teenagers at home, robotics, I mean, there are robotics classes and then clubs in their high school. I mean, this is, to some extent, the future. Given the expense of the redundancy necessary in a manned program, and our need to get the most training and research and engineering experience knowledge for the dollars we spend at NASA, isn't it time to say that maybe manned programs should be really rare and reserved for rare occasions because they just don't deliver the bang for the buck that and I'm talking about basic science knowledge. And, you know, Dr. Zurbuchen, your testimony is excellent. I think it points out that we need to know these things, and there are other societal benefits. But to the two doctors on the panel, isn't that really the way we ought to be thinking of going? If our basic expansion of knowledge through a government-funded entity like NASA, and of course preserving defense-related, weather-related, all the other things that we do, is that the way that we should go?
My personal feeling is that there's a tremendous value over time that has come both from the manned and from the robotic type missions. I do believe that robotics will have on the timescale of the next 20 years or so, probably if we make predictions, which as you know is always hard, but if we make predictions, we'll have more economic impact on how we're going to drive our cars, how we're going to fly our planes, and how surgeries are being performed than you know, human space missions. It's my belief, though, that if you go to a timescale of 30 or more years, that prediction is going to be a lot tougher to make. I believe that in many ways, once you put the human in the loop, and especially if you go to places where you do not know where you're going, kind of a true exploration, that there kind of things happen on the innovation front that really help us uncover aspects of our experience and also aspects of technology that will have tremendous impact in long time. The same certainly happened on the Apollo side. You know, it's not the case that even though the examples that you're mentioning are truly compelling, there are many aspects to our lives that did come from the human side of NASA as well. So basically, if you ask the question as clearly as you did, should we just kind of forget all about it? I certainly would not subscribe to that kind of recommendation.
And I want to emphasize, not forget it, but lower the emphasis a little bit is really. Dr. Pace.
Sure. I think, first of all, you have to make a distinction between sort of science and exploration. I mean, NASA is more than just a science agency. It also is an exploration agency. It's a tool of U.S. foreign policy. So it does a whole bunch of things other than just science. If we're just looking at science as defined, say, in the decadal surveys, then it's really straightforward. Okay, robotic systems are what you do. But the reason why you do humans, in part, is for exploring the unknown. By literally putting people in an unusual or an alien situation, you learn things that you wouldn't learn if you stayed at home. There's a wonderful example of looking at salmonella viruses and how they become more virulent in space in zero-G, and these are experiments to be done on board Space Station. And this means there's a gene sequencing issue, and if we can figure out how to control that, we can have a potential vaccine for salmonella. Okay, that is not something that would ever really emerge in a ground-based laboratory. It emerges when we put life sciences people in a very, very different environment to go into the unknown. Human spaceflight is probably the most interdisciplinary scientific and technical activity that this country can engage in, much broader than biotech, IT, any of the other particular fields, because you really have all fields have to come together to pull off a successful mission. It's incredibly, incredibly hard. But that's where really the benefit is from pushing into the unknown. So I would say as part of your portfolio of activities that humans have to be part of it because they do represent this really challenging interdisciplinary problem that is really unique. And it should be part of our national portfolio because there's nothing that replaces the symbolism, the emotion, the connection that it makes not only to the American people but also to our partners around the world. The International Space Station is not only an engineering triumph, it is also a massive diplomatic triumph that has paid great benefits, I think, for this country already in terms of building relationships around the world. So the question for NASA and human spaceflight is, what do you want it to be? What national interests do you want it to serve? If it's only science as defined in the decadal surveys, then I think you can go down a purely robotic path. But I think the vision for NASA is much bigger than just that. It is a science agency, but it's also so much more.
Thank you very much, and thank the panel and thank the chairman for the opportunity to serve on the committee.
I have a feeling that General Sega wants to add something. You can't turn the general down.
Okay. Well, thank you. I just wanted to add the question itself poses, one of the key points of our study is that the national consensus determining these strategic goals and objectives are important. And from that would flow then the balance and integration, perhaps, of exploration, science, technology, and aeronautics for NASA. One other point, as Congressman Walker talked about a report, I just want to kind of clarify. One of our options was to institute an aggressive restructuring program to reduce infrastructure and personnel costs to improve efficiency. We didn't go to any in detail of whether that was an option one would choose or how to do it. So, thank you very much, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. And gentleman has yielded back. I want to thank everyone. Thank you for your time of preparation, travel, and presentation. And all the staffs here, I want to thank these wonderful staffs that make this world go. And I'd like to ask unanimous consent that as we close today, that we close in memory of the life of Gabriel Gifford, honor her life, and remember the death of Neil Armstrong for a moment of silence. Amen. We are closed.